We're going to cover multiple choice questions for the listening paper in this lesson. Okay, so multiple choice questions are a type of question you're probably very familiar with. For the listening paper, most of the time you're going to have a question with 3 answer choices, just like the ones you see here. There's a basic question, for example, number 1, the reason for the special seminar is, and then we need to choose the correct answer based on what you hear. Okay, so a very familiar question type. We're going to look at strategies related to this question, these 2 questions here in just a moment. But first, let's talk about what to do and how to strategize as you approach these questions on the IELTS listening paper. First of all, just some basic information. These questions, the directions are very simple. You're just going to choose the correct letter, A, B, or C. It'll tell you which choices are possible there. Sometimes you will be instructed to choose more than one answer. In this case, there will be more answer choices provided. There may be 5 choices and they'll tell you choose 2 or something like that. So yeah, you do have to read the directions, but if you see anything more than 3 answer choices, you know it's going to be that you have to choose more than one. So just like you always do, make sure to take a quick look at the directions to make sure you know exactly how many answer choices you should select. Okay, now some more basic information about this question type. Okay, so as we saw, this can be the format of these questions can be a question itself. So they might ask you, what did the speaker say about this? And then you'll have 3 choices after that. So it can be in the form of a question. It can also be in the form of a sentence or a phrase that's incomplete, and you sort of have to finish that sentence or phrase with the answer choices provided for you. Okay, so those are 2 possibilities there. The answer choices will be in letter form, so A, B, C, or possibly more if they ask you to supply more than one answer. In terms of strategy, all right, before the passage begins, in the time you have to analyze and make predictions about the questions, make sure you do a couple of things for these. First, read the prompt carefully and decide what kind of information will answer the question. Okay, we're going to look at an example of this in a moment, but you should be able to underline the key words in the question that will help you to determine exactly what you're supposed to look for. It helps to underline or even write notes beside each question to indicate what you're supposed to focus on, what you're supposed to listen for from the speaker for that particular question. But you also need to focus on the answer choices and underline keywords for those. Each one will contain some information that will tell you whether or not it fits what the speaker says or not, and it helps to know what to listen for before the passage begins. So not only reading the question, but also taking a look at the answer choices can be a very important thing to try to do before the speaking starts. Okay, now it's tough. You only have a short time to look over all the questions, and sometimes IELTS listening paper, you have a lot of multiple choice questions to look at in a particular section. So this can be difficult to do within the short time you have, but at a very minimum, make sure you study the question and the answer choices for keywords, trying to figure out and make predictions about what to listen for. We'll look at some examples of that in just a moment. Okay, but first, as you listen, so as the speakers are talking and you're trying to answer questions, it's important to keep in mind that each answer choice will have some connection to the passage, okay? IELTS never just gives you an answer choice that's wildly sort of wrong, that's clearly wrong and easy to figure out. Each answer choice will have some connection. Either it's going to be maybe a similar word or exactly the same word is used in the passage by the speaker, Or there's a sense in which, possibly each of answer choice might feel correct if you didn't have especially a full understanding of the vocabulary words, or maybe you misunderstood a sentence or something like that. Okay, so IELTS chooses its answer choices very carefully, and each one will be somewhat tempting, although there will only be one clear answer for each question. Okay, now often as you're listening, you're going to hear what you think might be a correct answer, but then later the speaker changes course, changes his or her mind, or makes a correction, or does something to change the information. For example, let's imagine you have a sentence like this in the listening passage you're listening to. So the speaker says, "I would love to join you at the theater this afternoon." And maybe the question you're trying to answer is about, what time will the two people meet each other? Morning, afternoon, or evening? Okay, so here, we think we have the right answer because the speaker said afternoon. But then a few seconds later, or even later than that in the passage, the speaker corrects himself. I have an appointment that will last until 5:30 p.m. Could we get tickets for 7 p.m.? All right, so in this case, the correct answer, assuming that the speaker doesn't change his or her mind again, is going to be evening, not afternoon or morning, because of this correction. Okay, so be careful for that. The changing course is something that can happen pretty regularly on the multiple choice questions on the listening paper. Okay, now let's take a look now at the sample questions we saw at the beginning of this lesson and think about how to use our strategy in order to approach these questions like you would want to do on the test. Okay, so the first thing we do, as mentioned earlier, is to take a close look at the question itself. So, number one, the reason for the special seminar is what? Okay, and we've got those three choices there. Now, the key to this and the most important part of the question we see there is the reason. What we're supposed to listen for is the reason for the special seminar. So our answer choices are going to be reasons, and that's what we're going to be listening for from the speakers in the passage that will come soon. So as we're planning and as we're trying to make predictions for what answer choices to select, we need to underline or circle this part of the question because this is what we're listening for in the passage as the speakers are talking. Okay, now some things to think about with this particular question prompt. All right, now it says special seminar, the reason for the special seminar. Now, we haven't listened to the passage yet. We don't know what the speakers are going to say. So we should ask ourselves a question. Is this going to be one of several kinds of seminars discussed in the passage? Is there going to be a regular seminar or some kind of different seminar described? We don't know. That would be something to be careful about with this question, that there might be different seminars described. And so we have to keep all of that straight and think about which seminar relates to this particular information, which is only focused on the special seminar. Okay, so something to consider there. I would certainly underline the reason in this question and probably put a question mark next to special seminar just in case the speaker starts talking about different kinds of seminars. All right, now, as we look at the answer choices and think about what's coming for those, notice that we have three very different kinds of activities here. We have review, planning, and discussion. Okay, so those are three very separate, very different types of things that could be described here, and those would be good things to notice, that those are our three options for this that will supply the reason for the special seminar. Okay, so those are the things I would underline and try to take a quick look at to analyze question number one. Okay, question two then, pretty similar kind of thing we have to do. So, question two, the speaker instructs the class to. Okay, we need to listen for, the key information there is to listen for what the speaker tells the class they must do. Okay, so we need to underline that part because we're looking for some type of thing that's sort of maybe in a command form or a set of instructions. Okay, then as we look at the answer choices, notice this, that answer choices A and C are a little bit similar in the sense that the verbs study and review could be quite similar and possibly might even share a similar paraphrase or synonym as the speaker's talking. So we'd want to be careful there. So we'd have to look later in the sentence there or in the phrase to figure out, okay, what are they supposed to study and what are they supposed to review for these two answer choices? Well, so for A, it's studying author's notes. And C, it's reviewing a lecture outline. Those would be key details to keep separate as you're trying to listen for the answer to this question. Answer choice B is very different from A and C. They're instructed to write something, okay, and post it possibly in a forum of some kind. So that's a very different thing than answer choices A and C. All right, so a lot of details to keep straight. Use your pencil as you're listening in your test booklet. Underline these keywords from the answer choices and give it a little thought in the time you have before you listen, trying to figure out how each of the answer choices is going to be different and possibly expressed differently by the speakers in the passage. Okay, now let's do a practice question here to apply some of the things we've learned about so far. In a moment, I'm going to play a recording so you can try to answer this particular question. But first, let's just take a close look at it to think about what we would do to prepare for listening for this answer. All right, now the question says, the student visits the library, and then each answer choice continues on to ask, to find, or to track down. What we're looking for is the reason. Why is the student going to the library? And we need to listen for that reason from what's mentioned in the text. All right, now some differences among the answer choices. So the student's going to the library to find information about a forgotten text, okay, to get a revision of a famous story, or to track down a rare short story. Okay, so notice some things there in the words used. Forgotten and rare, answer choices A and C. Those are somewhat similar words, although forgotten means that something is, people no longer remember it, right? It's not something that's discussed or talked about. Rare is very different, right? Rare, it means that something is difficult to find. There aren't many of that thing out there, okay? So rare and forgotten are key words there that supply some differences between these two answer choices, okay? B is very different. A famous story, very different idea than rare and forgotten. Okay, so that's something to notice before you listen. And those are things I would certainly underline as I'm preparing to answer this question. All right. Now, let's listen to the passage, and you can try your best to answer this question based on what you hear. Okay, so I'm going to start the passage now.
Excuse me, I'm wondering if you might be able to help me. I'm looking for the original text of a short story by an author I'm studying for my 20th century American literature class, and it turns out that this particular story's original version is a little obscure.
I'd be happy to help you, but, what about the story makes it obscure? Is it simply not a well-known piece of work?
Well, actually it's a somewhat well-known story, but it's been published in different versions over the last several decades. I've read it several times in collections of stories, so I know the story well, but I haven't read every version of it.
Okay, so hopefully you got the correct answer here. In this case, it's answer choice C. And we got that from a couple of different spots in the passage. So let's analyze why this is the correct answer. So he says, I'm looking for the original text of a short story. Okay, so that removes answer choice B as an option because he's saying I want the original text, and answer choice B says the latest revision. Okay, so that already excludes answer choice B. A and C at this point would still be possible. But let's continue. He says, and it turns out on this particular story's original version is a little obscure. Okay, another reason here why B is not correct, because obscure is not the same as famous. Obscure means rare. Okay, so already we're getting support for answer choice C. So B is clearly not right, but A could still work at this point because A, we're talking about a forgotten text. Well, obscure and forgotten are a little different from each other, but you could still make an argument that A is correct at this point. Okay, but then we have later, the male student continues. After the librarian says something in reply to him, he continues this way. Well, actually, it's a somewhat well-known story, but it's been published in different versions. Okay, here we see why A cannot be correct, because it's a well-known story. It's not a forgotten story. So the story's well-known, the text is well-known. It's just that the original text is somewhat obscure. And so that is a much closer meaning to C, that it's a rare short story. It's a rare version of the story, difficult to track down. The story itself hasn't been forgotten. Actually, it's somewhat well known. It's just hard to find the original script of it. And that's what the student is talking about. So that's why C is your best answer. And this is a good example of a multiple choice question where you have to keep listening, keep an open mind about the answer choices, and try to maybe cross things off that you hear to be incorrect, and try to determine which one is the best answer based on all the information provided by the speakers. Okay, so these are our multiple choice questions. Just as a quick review of what we learned in this lesson, make sure to read the prompt carefully, decide what kind of information will answer the question. So you read each question, look at the answer choices, and underline keywords in those as well, because analyzing those will tell you what kind of information will work and will not work as possibilities once the speakers begin talking about the subject they're discussing. The last one, keep an open mind while you listen. Just keep in mind that speakers often change course or that answers might unfold over a little bit of time in the passage. So you keep an open mind. Try to figure out which one is the best answer after all the information is provided for each question. Okay, so those are multiple choice questions and how to approach them on the listening paper.